I am a resident of Portland, Oregon. I have had 2 experiences with the unknown in my lifetime. The first was when I was about 10 years old and living in Vancouver, Washington, in the general Portland metro area. My family lived on a dead-end street that backed up to a large undeveloped open field that went on for miles until it hit the Columbia River. One night, at around 11 p.m. or so, we're all sitting at our dinner table eating dinner. Quick note here, we were a family that ate dinner very late. Oftentimes, eating around 9, 10, or 11 p.m. was pretty common for us, since we all stayed up till about 1 or 2 in the morning. Anyway, back to the story. We had heard something outside our back door growling and snorting. It reminded me of something like an angry bull. We all looked at each other, wondering what it could be because there's no farms out here anywhere close by, and it sounded as if whatever this thing was wanting to try and get into our house through our back door, which is made of a sturdy metal screen material with wood framing. My dad got up from his chair, grabbed his gun off the rack, went by the door and opened up both doors leading outside. He stood outside listening for a while, but the sound ceased and nothing happened. He came back inside after a couple of moments, shaking his head, and sat back down, unsure of what it could have been. Maybe somebody's dog escaped through their yard somehow, but he wasn't really sure how to explain it. But dogs don't sound like bulls. So, after everybody finished eating dinner, and things seemed to calm down for the next 30 minutes, my father stepped outside. It was about midnight. He began to light up a cigar and smoke it. This is when things went south real quick. I stepped outside with my father because I was talking to him when we could both see something large watching us through the wood line about 30 yards away. My dad noticed it first and got real quiet. I asked him what was wrong and he said, "Look over there," quietly, and I saw it. What appeared to be a large black wolf-like creature standing on its hind legs, peering at us through the trees. We stood there for about 5 minutes just watching this thing slowly move, as if trying to stay sneaky and stealthy. My dad finally got very pale and almost sickly looking when he told me, "We need to go inside right now." I didn't ask any more questions. We went back in the house, locking all of our doors, and my dad kept his gun really close by all night. That night, I slept with my parents because whatever that thing was scared me. It wasn't normal. And I knew by my father's reaction, he knew that as well. The next morning, my father was outside to see if he could see anything, but apparently did not find anything. Nothing broken or no tracks, nothing out of place. He was convinced it was just a trick of the eye and perhaps maybe a large dog was looking at us. But as an adult, I realized he looked out for me as a child, and if it was something supernatural, he would have never admitted it to me. My second experience happened when I lived in Portland, Oregon, many years later, after moving from Vancouver, Washington. This time around, I was much older. This time, instead of seeing something strange outside my home, I saw something, what I believed to be a similar creature outside my window. We were playing video games and laughing and joking, when all of a sudden, 3 of my friends got really quiet. I looked up from what I was doing and saw when they stopped talking suddenly to notice all of them staring at me wide-eyed. But they were not staring at me, but staring in my direction with fear written across their faces. So naturally, being curious, I asked them what the matter was, but as I finished my question, their gazes were fixed on the window right behind me. I turned to look and saw this black wolf-like face pressing against my window, with these ominous yellow glowing eyes. I was so terrified that I could not move or speak. I stood there frozen with fear, as did everybody else. This thing continued to stare in at us for maybe 2 or 3 seconds before finally disappearing away from the window. We all freaked out. The next weekend, we ended up doing a seance and cleansing the house with sage. Never had another experience like that again around here. Thank goodness. I don't know if it was a demon or possibly an animal, but whatever it was a pretty scary experience. Hello there. I am a former park ranger. I've been into your YouTube channel for some time now, but this is the first time I've really felt compelled to contact you directly. This past weekend, August of 2019, my girlfriend and I went camping at Starved Rock State Park here in Illinois. We arrived on Friday afternoon around 5 p.m., set up camp near the river, and then hiked down to the water's edge, where we stayed until dusk, when we returned to our campsite for dinner and an evening of stargazing before retiring to our tents around 10:30 p.m. Around midnight, my girlfriend was awakened by the sound of something moving around our campsite. She woke me up. I listened for a few moments before deciding it was probably just an animal or a raccoon, possibly rummaging through our stuff. We tried to go back to sleep until we were both awoken again at around 1 a.m. by what sounded like somebody walking around outside our tent. My girlfriend claimed she had heard voices, but I did not hear anything other than large footsteps. We got dressed, grabbed our knives and guns, and went to investigate, since neither of us had ever experienced anything like this while camping. And there also are no bears here in Illinois. As soon as we stepped outside the tent, all hell broke loose. These strange creatures began screaming at us from around our camp and across the river. They sounded like women getting murdered, but their voices so deep and shrill. I've heard recordings of a howler monkey before, but these things sounded much louder and worse. We jumped back into our tent. We tightly gripped our flashlights, waiting for the screaming to subside. As we stepped outside yet again, once everything had stopped, the screaming started up again. This time, there were several more of them around us in different locations, but also along the shoreline on both sides of the river. I could hear multiples of these things coming from different directions. It was terrifying. The screams lasted for about 10 minutes until they finally stopped abruptly after one of these things was right near our tent on the left side. It felt like it was standing right by the tent. After the very last scream ended, everything got quiet, except for some rustling in some bushes behind us, where we could have sworn we saw something big moving around, right when we shined our light towards it. We decided that enough was enough, hid in our tent, and stayed there until dawn broke, where we would ultimately move our campsite. Daybreak was not until 6 a.m. All night long, we could hear them stalking our campsite, growling and snarling, but they never came close again, at least not close enough to see. I've been an avid outdoorsman all my life and have spent countless nights alone in the woods, but this was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. These creatures sounded huge, like demonic gorillas or something, only much larger. Their screams were so loud, it felt like they could be heard for miles. I'm sure any neighbors that were nearby probably heard them too. We left camp as soon as dawn broke and have never returned since. I am a hunter and outdoorsman. I have been hunting since the age of 12, and I have hunted all over the state of Michigan for deer, bear, turkey, and other small game. In 1988, while bow hunting in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I had an encounter with what can only be described as a werewolf or Dogman type creature. It was around 2:15 a.m. when my friend who was with me started to hear something walking through the woods in our direction from about 80 yards away on our left side, coming up behind us at an angle from below where we were sitting. This was on top of a hillside overlooking a valley that dug down into some deep, thick, brushy swamp, kind of like an area below it, which led to Lake Superior shoreline, about a half-mile away across this valley floor. We had heard heavy footsteps crunching leaves underfoot as it came closer, until we could finally see its silhouette. It was moving along just inside the edge line, between about 20 to 30 feet off the trail by the trees in front of us. This thing stopped directly across the trail from where we sat, above him, looking up at him, standing there staring back at both myself and my friend, who had his flashlight pointed right onto its face, but still could not see anything other than blackness, because it stood so close to the tree line that it did not reach out far past enough before shadows being cast by tree branches hanging over the pathway that he stood upon. The moonlight shined brightly enough for me to make out details within shadows cast by trees surrounding the area, but not bright enough yet for the eyesight adjustment needed after being blinded momentarily by flashlight beams shining directly into this thing's face. After several minutes passed without either one of us making any movements or sound, except breathing heavily, due mostly to fear, and this thing suddenly let out the most blood-curdling scream, which sounded like nothing I've ever heard. It made the hair stand straight up on my neck and arms, then turned quickly, running off deeper into the woods, leaving 2 hunters shaking uncontrollably, scared half to death, wondering if they would survive another night alone deep in the wilderness, miles away from civilization. That's how bad and scary that scream was. My buddy said that I'd never heard anything like that before in my life. I told him neither have I. We both agreed it sounded like a cross between a woman screaming and an owl hooting at the same time, but much louder than either one of those sounds could ever be. It was truly terrifying to hear. After about 10 minutes had passed, we decided to pack up camp and head back downhill towards our truck, parked at Lake Superior shoreline below us. This is where we would spend the rest of the night, sleeping inside the cab, doors locked, until morning light came. This way, we could get out of there as fast as possible without getting lost or potentially killed by this thing lurking somewhere nearby, watching us from the darkness. The following day, we returned back into the area with daylight on our side, right where the encounter took place. After searching for tracks, which were hard to do due to the thick brush swamp grass covering ground everywhere except along trail edges, we found what looked like human footprints, only larger than normal size, about 14 inches long and 5 inches wide across the toes. But these prints were not made by any man wearing boots. They did not show any wear patterns such as heel marks or toe indentations caused by bootlaces pressing into soft mud or walking through wet leaves, laying over top moist soil beneath them. These prints showed no signs of wear whatsoever, indicating that whoever left them walked barefoot, leaving deep impressions in the ground beneath each step, showing clearly defined canine-like patterns pressing down. The prints appear to be somewhat human but also canine in a sense. The creature or person must have weighed about 400 pounds, judging by how deep its footprints are compared to mine, which only measure about 10 inches by 4.5 inches. I weigh around 220 pounds, so you could see how much bigger this thing is than me. It was a very frightening experience, to say the least, and one that will never be forgotten. I have since gone on to tell many people about my encounter over the years, but most of them just laugh it off as being nothing more than a Bigfoot or Sasquatch sighting, which it wasn't. This creature was much different. Its eyes had glowed red in the flashlight beam shining into its face and looked distinctly canine. My buddy said he had never heard a scream like that before in his life, as I said, and neither had I. The scream was terrifying. Let me first start off by saying that I'm a very experienced outdoorsman. I've hunted, fished, tracked, and guided for the better half of my adult life. I've been in the woods all my life, and I know what a bear looks like, sounds like, and smells like. I also know what a wolf looks like and sounds like. This was neither of those things. I had just finished up some work on my cabin, about 2 miles from where this happened to me. It was around 9:30 p.m., when it was just beginning to get dark. This was summertime, so I decided to head back home for the night, since there was not much light left anyway. As soon as I got into my truck and turned on the headlights, something caught them off in front of me, about 50 yards away across an open field surrounded by trees with thick brush along the sides of it. At first glance, it looked almost human, but then again, not quite at the same time. It stood upright, but its arms were long enough that they hung down past its knees. Its hair covered every inch of its body, except for maybe its face. The only way I can describe how he looked is if you took a mannequin or a statue and made it out of fur, because it did not move at all until after I sat there looking at him for probably 10 seconds, trying to figure out exactly what I was seeing, but nothing makes sense. After a while, he began walking towards me very slowly while making these weird noises that sounded kind of similar to somebody who has their mouth full of chewing food really loudly, but louder than anything else I've ever heard before. He walked right up to next to one of the side edge lines between 2 rows of trees, stopped moving completely still, standing sideways, facing towards me with his hands hanging down by his legs. Then, after another 10 seconds, we both stared each other down without moving until finally breaking eye contact when he suddenly runs off through some bushes into some more tree lines behind him. After watching this thing run away, I quickly jumped inside my truck, locking the doors and shut the windows, driving straight home, only 2 miles away. I have no idea what this thing was or why it acted so strange. Why? Why did it do what it did? It was like a large wolf or something. I have a terrifying story that I'd love to share with you. This happened back in 2005, right after high school. I had just begun attending the local community college and was living at home. My parents were divorced and lived in different states, Dad back east and Mom out west. I usually spent 1 week with my dad during summer vacation, but that year, I decided to stay in town so I could get a head start on classes, while everybody else took their long vacations later on. So, it was June 2005 when this happened. I never considered myself a dog lover or particularly fond of them, but we did have 2 dogs that stayed outside all year round. Daisy, a German Shepherd, and Bobby, a Border Collie mix. One night, around 1 a.m., something woke me up from a deep sleep. The sound of our dogs barking loudly directly below my bedroom window. When they do this, it's because there's an intruder or danger nearby, like deer walking by or raccoons rummaging through trash cans. Not for no reason at all, as they are generally quiet otherwise. There seemed to be quite some commotion going on down there, so after sitting up in bed, wondering what was happening, I grabbed my phone, which was both flashlight and video capability, and went towards the window to see if anything looked wrong or out of place, since the first step always seems like a safer option than trying downstairs alone. It happened. As soon as the phone light shined down onto the lawn between houses and driveway, where the dogs stood barking their heads off, right next door to the neighbor's huge black Labrador came bounding across his yard. He didn't stop but continued running straight into our backyard. The sight made me freeze for only a second. Then, he turned 90 degrees right into the direction, and Daisy was facing him. She must have either taken him to be a threat because she's a highly trained guard dog, or simply recognized him as not friendly. She immediately went into full attack mode, barking, snarling, and charging straight at this massive dog. But that monster, this was not a lab like I'd originally thought. It was longer, remotely resembling what I thought was a dog. I don't know how, but those first few seconds of frozen shock were enough for this thing to morph into something so hideous and deadly looking that my phone camera seemed to have serious trouble processing. This beast charged headfirst towards Daisy with a mouth wide open, exposing 2 rows of teeth like some sort of nasty carnivorous reptile. With each bounding step, its fur would ripple and shift all over its body, making me think of some badly dubbed movie where special effects are completely out of sync. Its eyes glowed a bright red from within, and the dark night all around them just made them seem all that more ominous. Daisy, who stood there totally fearless until the very last moment, when this creature was only a few feet away. I stood there frozen in shock, watching all of this unfold. Suddenly, her ears laid flat along back, a tail tucked between legs, and she ran off whimpering to the backyard and gate, across the street where the neighbor's house light shone brightly, illuminating the lawn directly below their bedroom window. I began to scream bloody murder at the top of my lungs, hoping that somebody would come out and help us. I grabbed the first weapon available, a wooden broom handle, running downstairs. As soon as I got outside, those dogs were already back. Something about this whole thing was so wrong and unnatural that my first reaction was to not protect Daisy at all, but to run into the yard with a broom handle in hand and chase off whatever had just happened. I felt like it would be too dangerous. As a small human being next to a monster of unknown strength, especially if it not saw me as a threat. As soon as one steps outside, this thing turned around and started running in my direction. It stopped running, turned to look straight at me, and then, slowly, on 2 legs now, began to slowly walk back towards the fence line between both properties where darkness had hit its features once more. This is when my neighbor's son came out the front door holding his flashlight, right on top of where the creature was on the fence. What I saw looks nothing like any remote canine species or anything similar that's ever walked the earth before. The way it moved, ran, and turned while trying to attack Daisy. This was some other alien life form, I'm convinced. Rather than imagining any natural evolutionary process, maybe this thing was perhaps created in a laboratory. I'm a retired police officer here in Kentucky. I've been watching your YouTube channel for some time now and decided to reach out to you about something that happened to me in the late 1980s when I was still on patrol. It was around 4:15 a.m., early on the morning of October 31st, 1988. We were dispatched to an area near the old Fort Knox Army Base, where there had been reports of a large wolf-like animal attacking people and roaming through the backyards, killing pets. There were also several calls reporting somebody being attacked by what they described as a large upright dog. We were told to be on the lookout for a large wolf-like animal that was reported as being 7 feet tall, weighing over 200 pounds and had glowing red eyes. As you can imagine, we thought it was a joke at first. We arrived at the said location within minutes and began searching the area with our spotlights but could not find anything. The dispatcher then informed us that there was another call reporting a current attack in progress near a local cemetery, so we headed off in that direction. As soon as we got close to where they said it happened, I could smell something foul in the air, like rotting flesh or garbage left out in the sun too long. There was also the distinct odor of wet dog that permeated the air. We drove around the area for about 10 minutes but didn't see anything, so headed back to our patrol and were getting ready to leave when I noticed a large dark figure standing in the shadows of an old tree that was near a small cemetery located on the edge here of Fort Knox. The moonlight reflecting off its eyes gave it away as being something other than a human, since there wasn't any light shining from inside or outside around any houses. You could sense the evil coming off of this thing. It looked large, standing on its hind legs, but was too tall to just be written off as a regular dog. I got out of my patrol car, shining my spotlight in this thing's direction, and then turned around and ran off into the woods, making sounds like a horse galloping through thick brush as it went deeper into the forest. We did not see anything else that night, so we headed back to our station. I have never told anybody about this incident until now. I feel like I would have been ridiculed for reporting something like this. I was an officer for over 20 years and have seen many things that people would not believe. This creature reminded me of something that had been hit by a car or deformed, since its hind legs were bent backwards and it was walking very strangely. Even though it looked like a large wolf standing upright, it had the body of a man, long black shaggy unkempt hair over its entire body and face. Its eyes were glowing red, as if using some type of night vision goggles that reminded me of. I have a story to tell you. It happened to me and my friends about a year ago. We were camping in southeast Minnesota, near the Mississippi River, in a clearing. It was a pretty good-sized clearing, about the size of a football field. We were all camping in the same spot, about 20 feet apart. There were about 10 of us in total. We were riding our dirt bikes throughout. We had been there for about 2 days and 2 nights, when we began hearing weird noises in the woods around us, like strange growling and snarling. We wrote it off as a bear at the time. We would often hear the noises at night and in the early morning hours, but not during the day. Sometimes we would also hear branches breaking and leaves rustling. We were convinced it was a bear. Then, one night, we heard the noises again, but they were coming from all around us this time. We were both pretty freaked out and decided, my girlfriend and I, to go inside the trailers we had brought with us. The story is pretty much just revolving around me and my girlfriend. The noises continued for about an hour, then stopping completely. That night, I was sleeping in a trailer with my girlfriend. We're both pretty freaked out and decided to sleep in the very back, which had windows all around it. I was lying down on a mattress and my girlfriend was laying down next to me. We were both pretty tired from the day, so we fell asleep fast. I woke up in the middle of the night, around 3:30 a.m. I had heard a loud noise outside the trailer. I looked out one of the windows and saw a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from about 5 feet away. I woke up my girlfriend and told her to look out. She saw the eyes too, and we were both pretty freaked out. We laid there for a few moments, trying to figure out what it was. Then we heard the thing outside start growling and snarling. It sounded like it was wanting to get into the trailer. We were both pretty scared. The moon was about half full that night, so a decent amount of light. We both had decided to look outside the windows to see what we could see. I looked outside one of the side windows and saw 3 sets of glowing eyes, all side by side. I told my girlfriend don't look, but she did, and saw the same thing on her side, all standing about 5 feet apart. We were both now terrified, trying to think and rationalize what it could have been. Whatever it was standing there and had been for a few moments, and all of a sudden, we'd heard this very high-pitched scream come out of their mouths. I don't know how to describe it, but it was one of the loudest noises I'd ever heard. It scared us both pretty badly, and then, all of a sudden, something began ramming at the back end of the trailer, like it was trying to destroy it. At this point, we were both about as scared as we had ever been. We laid there, not saying a word for about 5 minutes, and the next thing you know, this thing is clawing at the window trying to get in. We had both decided we had to get away from here as soon as possible, that eventually, these things were going to get in, and we would not be safe. I grabbed one of the Glocks we kept in a safe in a trailer, along with a few boxes of bullets, and told my girlfriend to get her handgun. We were both pretty scared and had no idea what we were going to do, but we knew we could not stay in here. Outside, it was dead silent. We didn't hear the high-pitched scream anymore, or sounds of any more scurrying or clawing at the window. After bringing a few magazines and loading one, we don't know how many rounds we would need to fight off whatever it was outside. Neither my girlfriend or I wanted to open up the trailer door in fear of what might be waiting for us outside. I grabbed my knife and told my girlfriend to stand by one of the windows as quietly and quickly as possible. She nodded and did as she was told. I slowly poked my head out the door, scanning all around in every direction, looking for anything and everything. After a minute or so, I went over to one of the windows and waited. My girlfriend looking out the window while I stood watch, waiting for anything to happen outside. She waved her hand back and forth at me from behind one of the covered windows. There was a silhouette on that side of the trailer, but no glowing eyes like we had seen before, and now no growling noises. We both waited there, a pistol in hand and ready to fire, just in case whatever it was wanted to follow us. Whatever was outside our trailer must have left because it had decided to leave us alone. I can't speak for any of the other 8 who were with us. I have no idea what we saw out there that night, but I do know, whatever it was, had to have been at least 8 feet tall, and the scream was very unlike any animal I'd ever heard before. I'm thinking now that some of those creepy creature sightings are real, and maybe they're more common than anybody else thinks.